Okay, so my name is Hämäläinen and I work at the University of Jyväskylä, Finland, as a professor in the field of technology-enhanced learning. And my journey towards PIAAC has been somewhat different in a sense, because when I was working as a postdoc within the Finnish Institute for Educational Research, there was a professor called Antero Malin, who was in charge of the PIAAC data in Finland. And he was kind of like considering that PIAAC is a very nice resource for understanding what are the skills and competencies of the adults. But at the same time, he thought that, okay, this is somewhat like an underused by the researchers. And he actually started out by going around within the institute and knocking on the people's door, whether somebody would be interested on the data. And then we kind of like got into the engaged into discussions, and he kind of like in the very nice and detailed level explained me like the possibilities and the limits of the data. And through that I have been collaborating with a colleague of mine from Wever from Kent University. We kind of like together tried to find our way through the PIAAC data in a sense that kind of like, since neither of us had like a background on the large-scale assessment data sets back then, and now luckily, quite some time later, we are a bit more expert regarding the data, and we have been kind of like using it quite a lot for the research. And the thing that was actually triggering me on the very beginning was like that since this big change is going on the working life, and we don't know that much about the adult skills and competencies all in all. And as we know, there are like the problem-solving skills and the literacy and numeracy data on the PIAAC data. And I was especially interested on the problem-solving skills because I have been working a lot with the working life, and this is like one of the most crucial things currently. And actually, like it's changing also very rapidly, especially now with the AI and all of those kind of like threats, what is happening on the working life, that works are kind of like disappearing. At the same time, we kind of like know that the basic skills of the humans are still needed, and actually the problem-solving skills are the kind of skills that combine the reading skills, numeracy skills, and also kind of like the creative thinking in a way. So I think that it's a kind of like a very nice resource for understanding the skills that are also needed within the working life. And the problem with the previous kind of like data sets was that they were typically in the workplace learning. There is a great studies over there, but they are typically like a small experiment and very contextual in a sense that, for example, in the construction side, there is a very nice studies in which they illustrate the needs, or on the pilots, on the flying, or on the other. And actually, before the PIAAC data, there was not such a resource for understanding what is the state of the art. And then we did kind of like the studies. We started out with the vocational education and training, and our first study was kind of like focusing the differences between the since there are two different types of organizing the vocational education and training in Europe. Basically, there is a workplace learning approach, and then there is a more school-based approach. And there is quite heated discussions every now and then, and it's like a very policy-oriented in a sense that political discussions are kind of like made around which one of those is better. And in our first study, we actually kind of like seek what is the state of art and whether there are differences between the countries because or associated with this workplace approach or school-based approach. And actually, what was very interesting was that actually this educational trend didn't explain the variation, because like in the both kind of ways of organizing the education, there were countries doing well and countries not doing that well, but there was a tendency for the adults with the vocational education and training to have kind of like a weak problem-solving skills, which is of course like very worrisome in a sense. For example, in Finland, 44% of the adults do have a vocational education and training background, so we are not talking about the small minority. And in many other European countries, it's also kind of like a very big trend. And if we think that kind of like from the perspective of the equality in general, it is not very good if the distribution between the educational level is like too big. And as I was saying, in Finland we have quite a share of the vocationally trained adults. And then our second study we focused especially on Finland. But to be very honest, in this point we were not that aware of or knowledgeable of the PIAAC data. So if I would do this study now again, I would probably take all the European countries. But it was also a bit of our way of kind of like making it through. And within our studies, we kind of like the models explaining like the factors explaining the variation in the adults' problem-solving skills based on the theoretical assumptions as well as empirical support. And this is how our model looks like. So basically in our first cluster we have the socio-demographic factors, because from all the large-scale assessment data we know that socio-demographic factors are more or less always associated with the skill levels. And then from what we took from the workplace learning studies was that like there is this work by Päivi Tyynjälä and colleague in which they have been kind of like clustering the work-related learning taking place at work, through the work, and for the work. So we took all the kind of factors that are kind of indicating the work-related learning. And then also, the everyday life learning is something very important, and then we took the factors regarding the everyday life learning, and then our outcome was the problem-solving skills. And what has been kind of like triggering our thinking through all these studies is like the tendency to have the low problem-solving skills. So basically, with the vocationally trained adults, there is this tendency. But the other thing which was also kind of like somewhat shocking was that we also did the study with the adults with the higher education background, and regarding the problem-solving skills in technology-rich environments, the teachers and teaching professionals were the ones with the lowest skills. So we also took a further look on the teachers in our latest studies. And then regarding the vocationally trained adults, the factors explaining the variation were the age, education, occupation, and gender. And regarding the work-related learning, use of numeracy skills at work, use of ICT skills at work, and learning at work. And then regarding the everyday life learning, use the numeracy skills in everyday life, use of ICT skills in everyday life, and use the reading skills in everyday life. So as you can see over here, we found quite nice indicators for those models that we actually developed. And sometimes something that you don't find significant is also very interesting. And regarding the vocationally trained adults, our attention pointed that actually adult education and training was not associated with the skills. So of course, based on the PIAAC data, we cannot make the claim whether this is like that there is no education, or whether it's because it is failing what is being done. And then our third study, it's not very useful if we just say that, okay, vocationally trained adults do have a weaker skills. So we actually focused on the adults with the vocational training background who have a strong skills. And the strong skills seem to be, the strong performers seem to be younger, more often male, and more often in the skilled occupations. And skills used at work and active use was more common among the strong performers regarding to numeracy, ICT, reading, or writing. And on everyday life, the results on the skills used were similar. However, actually this participation on the adult education and training, both on the job-related and non-job-related, was different than for our first study. And then for our fourth study, the understanding the problem solving still focused on the problem solving, understanding the problem solving skills on European higher education adults. And in the later studies, we also focused on the teachers. So regarding the problem solving skills, we somewhat like repeated what we did for the vocationally trained adults. And we found out that there is a tendency to have higher skills for the higher education adults. And then we found out that especially the age and the parental education. And I think that this parental education is something very critical, because now we are talking adults in the working life who have higher education, and still the parental education seems to be associated with the skills. So we cannot kind of like underestimate the meaning of the family background when we think of the educational trends and what should be done. And then the occupation industry, and with the industry we mean, of course, everything like a teaching and nursing and so on. And then the ICT skill use at home and adult education or training for the non-job related reasons. So actually this brings us again for the very interesting issue regarding, because like it seems to be very important what people do at their leisure time, and that's actually something that it's not so obvious how to kind of like encourage people to develop their skills on their own time. So we found out these critical issues, that the problem-solving skills working on the education field were lower, and of course this is like a very critical if we would think it for the literacy skills, and if we would find out that okay, teachers are the one with the biggest literacy skills, we would be kind of like truly worried. And of course, it's easy to say that, like, okay, teachers don't need it as much as the engineering. At the same time, with the PIAAC data, we have to remember that we have fields like nursing, and even them were doing the better. So we can conclude that these findings are worrisome. And especially for the teaching professionals, we need to find better ways to actually kind of like support. And one of the findings that we actually like found within the teaching professionals was that like there was much less opportunities at work to kind of like learn these skills and competencies. And for the future, teaching professionals need kind of like better abilities. And everyday life learning seems to be very kind of like important factor. So how to trigger these skills, what people do on their free time. And over here you can see kind of like the overview of our studies. So basically we started out with the vocationally trained adults. We focused on the finished vocational trained, and then for the adults with the strong skills, then higher education problem-solving skills, and then we did one study on the formal, non-formal, and informal learning. Then in the higher education, we also focused on the teachers' problem-solving skills. And then finally, we combined the PIAAC and the TALIS data, which is like a data only about the teacher skills and their self-assessment. But this was my part. Thank you very much. If you have any further questions, I'm happy to answer.